March 5, 1982. A personal trainer walks into Bungalow 3 at the Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles and finds his client motionless in bed. He is 33 years old, a Saturday Night Live original, and one of the most famous comedians in America. He is pronounced dead on scene. The coroner's report revealed something highly specific. This was a deliberate injection of two drugs mixed together, one a stimulant, the other a powerful depressant. When injected together, the two drugs chemically mask each other's physical warning signs. The stimulant pushes heart rate up, while the depressant suppresses respiratory drive. The user feels fine until those intersecting lines cross a lethal threshold simultaneously, and the heart unexpectedly stops. One half of that fatal mixture was cocaine, a known street drug. But the depressant that stopped his heart began its life a century earlier, sold legally on pharmacy shelves. We have to look at how a chemical engineered by elite scientists specifically to cure addiction ended up driving the deadliest overdose crisis of the modern era. The timeline starts in an 1874 London hospital. Chemist C.R. Alder Wright was experimenting with morphine, boiling it over a stove with acetic anhydride. He was looking for a less addictive painkiller. He sent the compound off for animal testing. The dogs and rabbits grew profoundly sedated, with researchers describing them as terrified, drooling, and disoriented. Wright jotted down his notes and shelved the compound. For the next 23 years, the discovery sat buried and ignored in academic journals. The most destructive narcotic in human history was synthesized almost by accident and then correctly discarded. It would take corporate ambition to dig it back up. By the late 1890s, the American Civil War had left thousands of veterans dependent on the morphine they were given for battlefield injuries. Doctors called it the soldier's disease. In 1897, Bayer Pharmaceutical saw a market opportunity. Chemist Heinrich Dresser wanted a commercial cure for this addiction. Dresser pulled Wright's forgotten compound from the historical record. Instead of long-term studies, Bayer tested the drug in-house on its own employees over a dangerously short trial period of just days or weeks, nowhere near long enough to detect chemical dependency. The test subjects reported feeling capable, powerful, and in their own words, heroic. Bayer trademarked the German translation of the word, naming their new medicine heroin. They aggressively marketed it directly to mothers for children's coughs and colds. Dresser missed a catastrophic biological detail. Heroin is diacetyl morphine, a compound that crosses the blood-brain barrier twice as fast as standard morphine. Once inside the brain, the chemical strips off its acetyl groups and converts right back into morphine. The user gets the exact same opioid experience, but delivered in a massively compressed, highly intensified burst that hits instantly. The exact chemical compression that made the drug highly effective and profitable in 1898 is what made it lethal enough to stop a comedian's heart 80 years later. Within just a few years of the drug's launch, medical journals were flooded with case reports. Bayer's promised cure for morphine addiction was simply trading one dependency for a faster, harder one. In response, the U.S. government passed the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act in 1914. Federal courts quickly interpreted the law as outright prohibition, stripping heroin from legal pharmacy shelves entirely. The government severed the legal supply overnight, but they built zero treatment infrastructure for the estimated 200,000 Americans already dependent on a drug their own doctors had prescribed them. Organized crime syndicates immediately recognized the opportunity. They had an artificially created consumer base of hundreds of thousands of people suffering from physical withdrawals with zero legal alternatives. A massive illicit supply chain emerged. Raw surplus opium grown in Turkey was smuggled by boat to the harbor in Marseille, France. There, chemists refined it into heroin at 98. Fighting it forced the creation of modern drug enforcement agencies, including the DEA. Organized crime did not invent the modern narcotics market. They simply filled a vacuum manufactured by a pharmaceutical company and abandoned by the government. The human cost compounded through the 20th century. During the Vietnam War, researchers made a startling discovery. Only 5% of addicted soldiers relapsed within their first year home. This proved addiction is driven by environment and social factors, not just chemical exposure. By the 1980s and 90s, the crisis layered on top of itself. Marginalized users, driven underground by strict prohibition and denied access to clean needles, began sharing syringes. catalyzing the secondary catastrophe of the domestic HIV and AIDS epidemic. Then, in 2010, the cycle repeated. Purdue Pharma reformulated its blockbuster prescription pain pillar, OxyContin, to make the pills harder to crush and inject. They marketed this to regulators as a safety breakthrough. This chart shows how the data shifted. Dependent prescription users didn't stop. Roughly 70% of those cut off simply pivoted to cheaper, illicit street heroin. In the years following that corporate decision, heroin overdose deaths in the U.S. more than quintupled. Suddenly restricting a legal supply without treating the underlying human demand doesn't stop addiction, it just forces users into a deadlier black market. Today, in modern epicenters of the crisis like Philadelphia's Kensington neighborhood, heroin's century-long era of dominance is actually fading from the streets. But the reason for that decline is terrifying. Roughly 80% of current overdoses are now driven by illicitly manufactured fentanyl, an exponentially more lethal synthetic that has quietly swallowed the heroin supply.
Cities are now pivoting toward harm reduction, using needle exchanges and new treatments to mitigate the damage caused by decades of mismanaged drug policy. A drug aggressively branded for its heroism authored 125 years of tragedy. Because these powerful institutions repeatedly tried to solve complex human pain with aggressive chemical shortcuts and blind prohibition. What do you think is the biggest lesson from the history of heroin? Let me know down in the comments.